Welcome back to our continuing walk through the lyrics of the Psalms. Today we're going to be in Psalm 13. If you appreciate this series, be sure to check out the other episodes. We're going sequentially through the Psalms, and Psalms don't all build off of each other necessarily, but some of the things that we may mention, we've probably talked about in previous episodes, especially when terms are repeated. So check out the playlist here. If you appreciate this playlist, the best way to show that is to subscribe. And when you do, enable notifications. That lets you know when we're doing giveaways and live streams. We've got another live stream coming up in a couple of weeks. So make sure you've enabled notifications. That's how you tell YouTube, hey, YouTube, I want to see more of this channel. I want to support what they're doing. I want to be kept in the know of what's going on in the dojo. Greatly appreciated. Doesn't cost you anything. It really helps us out. All right, so as usual, I'm going to read through Psalm 13 in the NIV, the old NIV, and then we're going to look at it in my translation that I put together. We're going to look at the Hebrew, we're going to look at the Septuagint, and different translations as well, because that's one of the best ways to get a range of what the text is saying if you don't have access to the original languages. So Psalm 13, very short. This is a lament psalm. And here's what it says. For the director of music, a psalm of David. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and every day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer me, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. My enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord, for he has been good to me. So that was the old NIV, 1984 edition. I don't think much has changed in the updated, if you have the new current NIV. But the reason I read from that is just because that's what the study Bible that I use when I'm teaching happens to be in. However, let's look at what the text itself actually says in Hebrew, and how different translations have handled different aspects of it. So the psalm begins in the Hebrew text. And remember, in English translations, they don't put the first verse as the first verse. They actually put it as the heading of the psalm for reasons I still haven't figured out. That's why the English and the Hebrew, as well as the Septuagint verse numbers, are off in a lot of the psalms. So it begins Hebrew verse 1, Lemnatseach mizmor le David, and we just transliterated Mnatseach, for the Mnatseach, or to the Mnatseach. Mnatseach is usually translated as choir master, something like that. If you noticed in these videos, the Septuagint has always translated this with to the end, istotelos. To the end is how the Septuagint always translates this Hebrew phrase lemnatseach. Now, we've talked about, we don't really know why or what this means. Is this referring to, this is a psalm that's supposed to be performed at the end, maybe at the end of worship, at the end of the sacrifice. Maybe it was written at the end of the psalmist's life, although I don't think, I'm just spitballing here. That's probably not likely. But why would the Septuagint translate Lemnatseach, which most translations just have as the leader or the choir master, as to the end? Well, we're going to see one of the reasons in the next verse. This song for David, or song to David, or song of David, or song by David. It begins, verse 2, Ad ana Adonai. Literally, how long? Actually, literally, it's until when, Yahweh, which idiomatically we translate as how long, Yahweh, or how long, O Lord, is how English translations that don't use the divine name handle it. Adana, how long will you forget me, Netzach? And Netzach is translated as forever, or always, or perpetually, or constantly. But notice this. This word Netzach is the root that Natseach comes from. Natseach is the sort of a participle version, like one who is netzaching, possibly. And the Septuagint translates it, Yos pote, how long, Kyrie, Lord, epilese mu, will you forget me? There it is, istelos, to end. So the Septuagint are seeing the connection of netzach and natseach. And both of these are having to do with like to the end, to the extreme. We would say forever, or always, or constantly. So how long will you forget me? Will you forget me to the end? So I thought that was interesting. We've always wondered where eis totelos comes from and how the Septuagint translates lemnatseach. And this, I think, gives a clue. But this is what the psalmist is asking. Adana Adonai, tishkacheni netzach, Will you always, or will you forget me always? Will you always forget me? Will you forget me forever? Will you forget me until the end? Adana, how long? Tastir eth panecha mimeni. So how long, Adana, will you hide your face from me? Now, this is an expression you're going to see a lot in the Psalms. I think some of the prophets as well, but God hiding his face. It's the opposite of the Aaronic benediction. May the Lord cause his face to shine upon you, or make his face shine upon you. So to hide the face is an idiom. It's a figure of speech. In the ancient world, it means to basically ignore, to turn away from. Now, there's an interesting parallel in the ancient world that was found at Ugaritic. Ugaritic and Hebrew, incredibly close languages, incredibly similar. I mean, Ugaritic texts are like the text of Canaan. And there's a text called A Sufferer's Salvation. This is a context of scripture. It's a collection of ancient Near East writings. This is context of scripture 152. So volume 1 of context of scripture, chapter 152. And in this poem, Sufferer's Salvation, we read a very interesting parallel. This worshiper of the various Canaanite deities is having an awful time. He's in a bad state. He's suffering. And this is on tablet 2. He says, my ill luck was on the increase. I could find no good fortune. I called to my God. He did not show his face. I prayed to my goddess. She did not raise her head. The diviner with his inspection did not get to the bottom of it, nor did the dream interpreter with his incense clear up my case. I beseeched a dream spirit, but it did not enlighten me. The exorcist with his ritual did not appease divine wrath. And he goes on, what bizarre actions everywhere. I looked behind, persecution, harassment, like one who had not made libations to his God. Libations is offering, like pouring out drink offering to your God, nor invoked his goddess with a food offering. So this righteous sufferer thinks he's suffering because he didn't offer food and drink to his gods. And so he's done all of these things to try to get relief. He's sought out an exorcist. He's conferred with a dream spirit, a dream interpreter, a diviner. He's gone to all of the religious officials and he's not hearing anything. And so he's lifting up a cry of lament because his God is hiding his face. And so now what we're getting in Psalm 13 is a very similar lament from a biblical perspective, not calling out to various unknown gods, not seeking out diviners and exorcists or any of the things that people in the ancient world would do, but just acknowledging that even God's people experience the same types of things that all other people experience in this broken world. How long, Yahweh, will you forget me always? How long will you hide your face from me? He keeps on with the Adanas, verse 3. Adana, ashith etzoth benafshi. And this is an odd phrase, and different English translations handle it differently, but it's literally, how long will I put counsel? So ashith is to put or to place. And then etzot, counsel, planning, benafshi, in my life. And nafshi is this is where we get nefesh from, which is the word for soul or breath. It literally means throat. So maybe how long will I mutter my own plans or mutter counsel or talk about counsel? Or how long will I put counsel, like set up established plans? How long will I be the one having to figure out what's going on in my own soul or in my own life? It's not a straightforward phrase in English, and there's a little bit of question how to handle it. But again, it's very similar to the Ugaritic sufferer saying, should I go to the diviner? I've gone to the dream interpreter. I've besought this God. I've done this. So it may have a similar connotation. Maybe. I'm not saying that these two poems are related. I'm just saying they're thematically very similar in terms of their idiom, the worldview, and what's going on. But anyway, how long will I, and I just left it kind of literal, put counsel in my soul. And then this broken phrase, the next line, yomam, agony, grief, sorrow, bilvavi, in my heart, in my inner self, yomam, day by day, or just by day. And it's not a complete sentence. It's just, again, this is poetry. These are lyrics. How long will I put counsel in my soul? Agony in my heart by day. So these might possibly be parallel, and the phrase put counsel in my soul may refer to, the literal meaning may not be the idiomatic meaning, and it may be something that parallels agony in my heart. So in my soul, benafshi, and in my heart, bilvavi. So to put counsel may parallel to experience agony, and it may be a bad thing. It may be, a way of talking about suffering. So the different translations, again, here's how they handle it. Lexham English, how long must I take counsel in my soul and sorrow in my heart all the day? King James, how long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? The new JPS Tanakh, how long will I have cares on my mind, grief in my heart all day? Lexham English, how long will I set counsels in my soul, which are like griefs in my heart for days? Dead Sea Scrolls translation, how long must I wrestle with my thoughts and have sorrow in my heart all day long? Holman Christian and the CSB have, how long will I store up anxious concerns within me? Agony in my mind every day. Now, this to me is an interesting point that's worth mentioning. We've talked about the heart before in this series and what heart means. It doesn't mean like what you feel with versus your mind, what you think with. In Hebrew, heart and mind are the same thing. It's just your lev or your levav, your inner self. And so you can see this, like how the English translations handle lev or levav. King James translates it as heart. ESV translates it along with the NRSV as heart, but the CSB translates it as mind. And both of these are correct. It can have the connotation of heart or mind. There's no difference grammatically. It's context determines. So just beware, because in English, heart and mind have two very different meanings for most people in popular usage, but they don't in Hebrew. Your heart and your mind, same thing in Hebrew. So you have this, and you can kind of see it here, this repeating pattern. Adana, Adonai. First it just says, how long, Yahweh? And then it gets more specific. How long will you hide your face from me? Adana. How long will I put counsel in my soul or in my heart, agony in my heart all day long? How long will my enemy be lifted over me? And then focusing externally on what's going on outside. So there's a cool like spirit, soul, and body theme here is your spirit, the inner part, you and God together, and that's what he addresses first. And then your soul, your world of your thoughts and your feelings and what's going on the inside, your emotional health, he deals with that. And then outwardly, your body, my enemies, how long will they be lifted over me? It's very short and it's very subtle. I'm not making a huge deal out of this, but there's some artistry going in with this repeated Adana, 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 asking it over and over and over again. If you ever start to think your prayers are repetitive, you're in good company. So Rolf Jacobson picks up on this in his commentary in Nikot on Psalm 13, and he says, with this fourfold repetition, there's a staircase effect by which the volume of the psalmist's cry, as it were, is increased. The simple repetition of the cry, how long, creates this intensification. Yet the repetition also introduces variety. Each how long introduces a different complaint. And these complaints mount upon the others to intensify the psalmist's cry. So the psalmist is just like, you think of the parable that Jesus told of the persistent widow, where she just keeps at it, and finally the corrupt judge has to, do justice just to get rid of her. The idea that God just wants us to say one thing once and then not repeat ourselves, like that might get wearisome for a person talking to another person, like if you keep pestering, but the Psalms God doesn't seem to mind that if the Psalms are our indication on how to pray. This crying out, taking it to God repeatedly over and over. I mean, there are things that we pray for years and years and years, and we are tempted to get weary. We're tempted to stop. We're tempted to say, well, I haven't heard anything, so that must be a no. Sometimes it could be a no, but it could also just be, well, keep at it. If it's what you really want, if your desires haven't changed, if your heart hasn't changed, if your situation hasn't changed, and it's causing you grief, sorrow, yagon in your heart, don't be afraid or ashamed to cry out to God. Adana, Adana. I see things on Facebook, things going on in the world, and stories, whether it's what's going on in Sudan or Ukraine or just the awfulness over in Gaza, and the accounts of what humans do to other humans, corruption at the highest levels, and just awfulness in the world. And sometimes all I can do if I share the story, sometimes all I can say is Adana, Adonai, how long, O Lord? And that's literally what I'll put in the thing, is just how long, O Lord? Sometimes that's the only thing that we can cry out. And so the psalmist now, he gets even bolder down in verse 4:3 in English. Habita, it's pay attention, look. It means to like perceive or take notice of. And it's an imperative. So look, anani, this is another imperative, answer me. So look, God, answer me. Two imperatives back to back. Answer me, Adonai Elohai, Yahweh my God. It's not commanding a stranger to do something. It's not yelling at a subordinate. It's pleading. It's crying out to not just Yahweh, but Yahweh my God. There's a loyalty here. There is just, the Ugaritic sufferer had his God and his goddess, and he pleaded to them and he tried to get them to answer him in all these different ways. Well, here we see who's the psalmist's God. And so he urges, he pleads, look, pay attention, answer me. And then this phrase, ha'ira enai, literally cause to be light. We would say enlighten or bring light to or brighten my eyes. Is another figure of speech. It means, something like cheer me up. I mean, that'd be a little too flippant, but to make someone's eyes bright, it's the opposite of like having dull, tired, sick, yellowish, jaundiced, suffering eyes. Like you can see if somebody has bright eyes. I mean, that's even a phrase in English. Hey there, bright eyes. Like, oh, somebody's up and alert and happy. And that's what he's asking God to do. Brighten my eyes, pen, lest, and this literally says, lest I will sleep the death. Now, it gets smoothed over in English translations. NIV that we read earlier says, or I will sleep in death. Some translations say like, I will sleep the sleep of death. And those are correct. They're not wrong. But Robert Alter pointed this out in his translation, that it misses the rawness and the uncouth, like the unsophisticated cry of the song, lest I sleep death. It just has more of a punch to it if you leave it a little bit rougher, and it brings about the poetry. Remember, this is poetry, and one of the things that English translations struggle with is they try to clarify what the words of the poetry mean, but in doing that, they depoeticize it, and they turn it almost into prose. So this is the balance you have to walk when you're translating Hebrew poetry. So here are the range of ways translators have handled it. Lexham English, consider and answer me, O Yahweh my God. Give light to my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. The Tanakh, look at me. Answer me, O Lord my God. Restore the luster to my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. And the Septuagint had, look, give ear to me, O Lord my God. Illuminate my eyes, lest I fall asleep into death. The CSB, consider me and answer me, Lord my God, restore brightness to my eyes, otherwise I will sleep in death. And then Peterson sort of condensed it. Take a good look at me, God, my God. I want to look life in the eye. So he combined those two phrases of brighten the eye and not sleeping in death. Again, the message is not a translation. It's a paraphrase. So it's just attempting to pull out the meaning or to like say it in a different way. Don't use the message for Bible study. Use the message the way Eugene Peterson used it, if you're going to use it, which is like what we're doing, to just consult it as kind of a read alongside the Bible to see the nuances that Peterson thinks are important. So again, you see this focus. He's talking to God, Yahweh, at the innermost level. Then he's talking about his own emotional, spiritual suffering, brighten my eyes, lest I sleep death. And then again, he moves outward to his circumstances, to the enemy. Lest my enemies say, I have prevailed. My foe, they will rejoice if I am staggered. And I've left this clunky like it is in Hebrew because it is literally my foe, that's a singular. They will rejoice, or they will exult, or they will sing praise. They will shout for joy, yagilu, because or if or when, ki, emot, I am shaken, I am staggered, I am made to stumble. So he's addressing God, he's addressing his inner self, and he's addressing his circumstances. And then we come to the last verse in Hebrew, which is the last two verses in English. Va'ani, but I, this is emphatic. When you see va'ani, and then a verb that's in the first person after it, this is unnecessary. Va'ani is unnecessary because batakti already has the I ending to it. So the only reason you would add this va'ani, which means and I or but I, the only reason you'd add this is for emphasis. So he's just compared all of these sufferings, his inner turmoil, his enemies, the suffering he's experiencing, the agony in his heart seemingly from God hiding his face from him. But then verse 6 turns the corner. Va'ani, but I, or some English translations might say, but as for me. something like that. But it's like, but I, who I truly am in my innermost self, b'chasdecha, in your chesed. And I just left it transliterated, chesed. It's that word, we've seen it before, loving kindness, mercy, steadfast love. There's no good one-to-one English translation. In your chesed, your devotion, your unfailing, loving, steadfast, merciful devotion, if you wanted to really go the Amplified Bible route, in that, in your chesed, betachti, I will trust. I will trust. I don't see it. It doesn't look like it's happening, but I am choosing to trust. Not that you're going to answer my prayers exactly how I want them, not that you're going to fix exactly what I'm telling you needs to be fixed, but I will trust in your chesed, in who you are, that you're not safe, but you're good. And so as the enemies, he was worried that the enemies would rejoice over him. Yagilu ki emot, my enemies will rejoice over me if I'm staggered. Now he says, Levi, but my heart, the same heart that had agony in it all day long, Yagel. So Yagel Levi, my heart will exult, will rejoice, will sing in triumph. Same word here as here. My heart will rejoice, Bishuatecha, in your salvation, in your rescuing me, in your delivering me. There's a reason that this is the name that Yeshua, Jesus, comes from, because he will save his people from their sins. Save me, deliver me. So the psalmist here, in your chesed, I trust. In your Yeshua, my heart will rejoice or exalt. This parallel line here, parallel Hebrew poetry. And then in the Hebrew, there's one more line. I will sing to Yahweh, ki gamal alai, for he, and this is one that's handled differently as well. This verb gamal can mean like to recompense, to repay, to give back what's owed, to restore, something like that. Some translations like NIV we read earlier just says he has been good to me. To be a benefactor is what it means sometimes. The translations handle it differently. Like some English, I will sing to Yahweh because he has dealt bountifully. So dealt bountifully with me is how they translate gamal. The old JPS, you'll notice it's all one verse. In the Hebrew Bible, verse 6 is the same as in English Bibles, verses 5 and 6. Just verses in Psalms are weird. Don't know why they broke them up the way they did, but poetry is hard to categorize and classify. So if you're reading in different Bibles, that's why. The Tanakh, but I trust in your faithfulness. My heart will exult in your deliverance. I will sing to the Lord, for he has been good to me. Septuagint, I will sing to the Lord, the one who has done well to me. CSB and HCSB, I will sing to the Lord because he has treated me generously. Now you'll notice that in the Septuagint here, and this is the Lexham English, you notice that there's an extra phrase here. I'll sing to the Lord, he has done good to me. And then it adds this phrase in the Septuagint, kai salmo to onomati kuriu tu hupsistu. And I will sing, psallo, this is where psalm comes from, P-S-A-L-M, psallo, I will sing to the name, onomati, the name of kuriu, the Lord. Tu hupsistu, literally the Lord of the height. So that's just worth noting. There's an extra line in the Septuagint that's not in the Hebrew translations. That's why if you're a Protestant using a Old Testament or Hebrew Bible, which is based on the Hebrew text, it's going to end as he has dealt well with me, or however you translate it. And if you're using something based on the Septuagint, then it's going to have one extra line. And this is very similar to a line from another psalm. So most likely it got stuck in there, or possibly the translators didn't want to end with God repaying or doing good to, as if it kind of puts God in a position of a patron, or, I don't know. Once you start trying to guess the motives of text critical decisions, you're very much on shaky ground. So all we can say for certain, for whatever reason, the Septuagint has an extra line at the end of this that none of the Hebrew manuscripts have. So this is a very simple psalm. It's very short, only 6 verses in Hebrew. And in the Exalting Jesus in the Psalms commentary, I like how they structured it. The way they themed it is that the main idea is greater honesty with God cultivates greater intimacy with God. And so if you were to break this up and preach expositorily through the psalm, if you're a preacher, teacher out there watching this, they've broken it up. the way they put it in 3 parts, which most interpreters think it's broken up into these 3 parts, but I like the way they named it. Part 1 is verses 1 and 2, and these are English verses 1 and 2, accusing God, expressing how you really feel. Verses 3 and 4, asking God, expressing what you really want. And then verse 5 and 6, accepting God, believing what is really true. I think that's a great way to summarize this psalm, Psalm 13, expressing how you actually feel, not trying to hide it, even if it gets repetitive, even if it seems sacrilegious, you're pouring out your heart. The psalm should break any notion of polite, pious prayer that we have imbibed, that God, who knows the depths of our hearts and what we're thinking anyway, would in any way be ashamed or disgusted or put off by us pouring out those hearts to him. Unfiltered, raw. That's what I love about the lyrics of the Psalms, is you're getting unfiltered, raw dialogue between God's people at their best and at their worst, and God himself. It would be great if more worship songwriters, more pastors, more lay leaders in churches that lead churches in prayer. It would be great if we paid more attention to the tone of the Psalms and incorporated that into our communal worship gatherings. You don't have to just pray like this when you're by yourself. This is a psalm in Israel's hymn book that was sung corporately. So I've said this before in this series, I'll say it again. Worship leaders, Christian musicians writing worship songs, Christian pastors or worship pastors choosing worship songs. How often are you choosing songs that give God's people the chance to corporately, openly, and publicly tell God things aren't right? How often do you do that? This psalm, Psalm 13, it doesn't end there. It ends with a declaration of what the psalmist is going to do as a result. He's going to trust in the chesed of God. He's going to rejoice in God's Yeshua, salvation. And this may or may not be grammatically significant in poetry. Hebrew only has 2 tenses, perfect and imperfect. And this may be important, it may not. I'm just going to point it out. It doesn't say my heart has rejoiced. It's imperfect. So you could translate this, my heart will rejoice. And that's how I've translated it, because God's Yeshua, his salvation, has not yet come to the worshiper. But some would say, no, it's just an imperfect. It's undefined. So you could translate it, my heart rejoices in your salvation. And that could possibly be a present tense, that right now the psalmist, even though he hasn't experienced the salvation, he's rejoicing in it. My problem with that, and the reason I translated it as I will rejoice in your salvation, is because it skirts a little too close for me theologically into what is the name it and claim it approach, the speak it into existence. Just tell your heart enough times that things are great, and eventually you'll experience joy. I don't think the Psalms require that. I don't think they command it. I think that can be a way of like talking ourselves out of what we're actually experiencing, and then you get into that peer pressure of I got to come before the Lord with rejoicing. I can't bring my struggle, or if I do, by the end I got to be happy. So it just forces a rejoicing where the text doesn't necessarily say that. It's okay to say, I will trust in your chesed and I will rejoice in your salvation, and acknowledge that those things, well, his chesed is a current reality. That's the nature of who God is. But his salvation, at least from the perspective of the psalmist, it may not have appeared yet. The psalmist may still be in dire straits. But it's an acknowledgement that it will happen, that God will be the one who in the end is vindicated, along with those who put their trust in him. So that is already true to some degree, but there's still a future aspect that we look forward to, the now and the not yet. So I like how Robert Alter ended this section. Now I don't have Alter's translations up on Logos or Accordance because it's not available in either of those. I wish it were. Hey, Logos, Accordance, Robert Alter, let's get your translation available with other Bible translations, because it's good. I like Alter's translation of the Hebrew Bible. I think he did a very good job. And I also like that he puts annotations to explain some of his translation choices. So he ended his with verse 6, but I in your kindness do trust. My heart exults in your rescue. Let me sing to the Lord, for he requited me. One of the things I like about Alter's translation is he's very adamant about trying to keep it as poetry sounding as the original Hebrew does, which I like. But he says, for the last verse about in your kindness I do trust, the speaker, no longer fearing that God will forget him forever, is suddenly sustained by a sense of trust in God. And he conjures up God's intervention on his behalf, almost as though it were an accomplished fact. In this way, the poem that began as desperate supplication concludes on a note of celebration. In the manner of a thanksgiving psalm, let me sing to the Lord, for he requited me. The fluidity of genres of many of the Psalms is an expression of their psychological dynamism. They express not one static attitude, but an inner evolution or oscillation of attitudes. Perhaps the prayer itself served as a vehicle of transformation from acute distress to trust. I think this is right on. I think the Psalms do that. The Psalms reflect the ups and the downs, as he calls it, the psychological dynamism. You know, in our own minds, we aren't always just in one mood. Sometimes we may be in one mood, but there may be something at the back of our mind that's kind of stuck back there, kicking around. And then it switches and we focus on that. Doesn't mean that we're totally resigned to oblivion. We still have some goodness, but that's just been pushed to the back. So there's this tension psychologically that all humanity experiences, and the Psalms themselves reflect that dynamism. That's one of the reasons the Psalms have stood the test of time. It's one of the reasons that they are Israel's hymn book, because they express the full range of emotions, sometimes even in the same psalm. So this is a great note by Alter. I thought it was worth sharing as we finish up looking at this psalm. So there you go. There's Psalm 13. Like with most things that on first glance you might skim over, the more you look at it, the more you turn it. It's like a diamond, you turn it, you see different facets each time. The more you do that with scripture, the more things you notice. So that's what this video series is intending to do, is to just slow us down and walk us through the Psalms, look at their lyrics and notice things that we might otherwise miss if we're just doing our Bible devotional reading for the day. So that's all for now. Stay tuned for Psalm, you guessed it, 14 coming up next. If you appreciate these teaching videos, most of the videos on our channel that get the views and the clicks are our study Bible reviews, which is fine. But this, to me, this is the more important of what we do here at Disciple Dojo. And I'd love to see more people who are looking for in-depth biblical teaching have access to it. So if you find this video helpful and interesting, do me a huge favor. If hopefully you've already liked and subscribed and enable notifications here on the channel. But then take one more step and share this video. Share it on your social media, email it to somebody, show it to your pastor or your small group leader or any other Bible nerd you know. Just help us continue to get the word out about this series here at Disciple Dojo. We've got a lot more. We're only in Psalm 13 and there's 150 of them. So who knows when we'll get done, but we're not in any rush. And if you guys keep watching, I'll keep doing it. So that's all for now. Stay tuned for more here at Disciple Dojo. As always, keep training.